In election season, and manifestos have been launched by independent candidates and political parties. This time round, crime, unemployment and the upliftment of the poor are just some of the issues that the African Transformation Movement hopes to tackle should it be in government after the May polls. The party launched its national campaign in East London last year. And then on Sunday, party leader Vuyo Zungula addressed ATM supporters during the launch of the party's Gauteng election campaign in Soweto. He has promised supporters that the party would focus on creating jobs if it were voted into power. So on that note, ATM President Vuyo Zungula joins us here in studio to unpack further what the manifesto entails. Vuyo, good afternoon, and thank you for your time on the SABC at this hour.
Thank you for having us.
So we're in full swing with an election mode obviously upon us. I wanted to look at the decision to go to Soweto. And in outlining your offering, your objectives, crime, tackling, poverty, coming to the fore. Talk to us about your offering.
Yeah, no, when we chose Soweto, it was precisely because we decided that we are going to have regional rallies across the different regions. We started with a national manifesto in December. Now we are going across the different regions to speak to the members and supporters of the ATM. When it comes to our offering, I think it's very important that we give a context on the state of the country, whereby it is, it has the highest inequality in the world. A lot of people, millions and millions of people are unemployed. More than half of the population lives in poverty. When it comes to the crime, we are worse off than areas whereby there's actual war. Because if you look at how many people were killed in Afghanistan in 2021, there was about 10,000. But when you compare that to South Africa is a way more, is way more. So our view, it needs now that we have direct and confrontational and fundamental changes into the economy, into the legal system, so that we deal with these problems, because the problems are so dire. We can't just glide over the problems, or want to, softly, want to make changes here and there. We need to have hard changes whereby we confront the problems. So that is why you are saying as a part on the issue of the economy. Yes. Our economy is structured in a manner that satisfies or a very few individuals, because very few individuals are actually participating in the economy. So that is why as a part we are saying 50% of government spending without compromise, it must be legislated that it must go to small businesses, because currently small businesses are only getting 20% of government spending. Also on the question of the goods that we produce, we've got, we've got so much in the economy in our country. But the problem is that we are importing things that we should be producing. Back in the day, there were factories in Butterworth, in Mthatha, in Bronkhorstspruit, in Qwaqwa, and there were jobs because people were producing those goods that were consumed by the economy. But now we import even small things such as toothpicks. We import, things that we should be producing. So we as the ATM are saying that under the ATM government, we are going to open all of the factories to ensure in each and every district in our country, so that the economy is not concentrated in Gauteng or Cape Town or Durban, but all different districts are able to produce the goods that they are utilizing on a daily basis. That will make diverse players in the economy instead of what we're having now, whereby there's very few players in the economy. And linked to that is a question of agriculture, whereby you are advocating for there must be one household, one farm policy, whereby each and every individual that has got arable land is able to farm, because people are eating food or have to eat food every day. But the suppliers, which is the farmers, we've got very few farmers that are providing food for the over 60 million South African citizens. That is why the food prices are higher. So we believe that we need to have a food security program that is anchored on the citizens, whereby citizens are able to use their land. When I was growing up, every January, there was a tractor that used to come, help us farm, and predominantly what we used to eat, it was what we got from our gardens. But come today, you find that even the basics such as tomatoes, people have to go to these retailers. And there's so many emerging farmers in our country, but they do not have shelf space. That is why we are also saying that there must be legislation that says if you go to King Williamstown, you find there a retailer, whether it's ShopRite, it's Checkers, or it's Boxer, 50% of whatever produce, fresh produce they have in those shops must come from the emerging farmers in King Williamstown. That way you create shelf space for our farmers, because we've got emerging farmers, black emerging farmers, who are practicing, but they do not have shelf space. So that is what we are saying in a nutshell. But critical is a question of crime. We're saying as the ATM, if we are going to have 85 people murdered on a daily basis, high levels of rape, we need to treat criminals as criminals, and not just sweet talk criminals and treat them as if they are just our girlfriends. We need to be direct with criminals, so that we do not have a culture in our country whereby criminality is seemingly encouraged. Because currently now criminals, they kill our people, they go to prison. Whilst they're in prison, they are fed by the very same victims. So that is why we're of the view that we need to be harsh when it comes to criminality by deploying all of the special forces to deal with the areas of illegal mining, to deal with hijacked buildings, deal with the areas whereby there's drugs, and make sure that, again, we are very clear on the issue of heinous crimes, because there are people that commit heinous crimes. In Soweto, 14 people were killed in one sitting. In another country, there would have been proper justice for those people. But in South Africa, when 14 people were killed in one sitting, up until this day, there's no justice. So we as a party, we do not want South Africans to live in constant fear. We want South Africans to enjoy their lives. And the best way for South Africans to enjoy their lives, it is to remove criminals from our society.
And so on the issue of that, how do you also then speak to the tackle the socio-economic conditions that perhaps create the environment for criminality to exist in its current form in South Africa? I think that is also an issue that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, that is why you find that we focus on job creation and the restructuring of the economy in a manner that ensures mass economic participation of our citizens. So that is how we're dealing with the socio-economic problems. Hence, we are talking again about the one household, one farm, so that people are not necessarily driven by hunger to commit crimes. But we do know that there are people who are just born criminals. A person will have everything, will have a job, will have food for their children, but will continue committing crime anyway. So that is why we are saying that for those people who are, unrepentant criminals, those are the ones we need to be deliberate on, especially on the question of drugs, because we can't say because you are hungry, you want to provide food for your children, you decided to sell drugs, the very same drugs that are destroying the future of this country. We are very clear as the ATM to say drug dealing must be met with the heftiest sentence, which is a life sentence without the possibility of a parole, to make sure that we clean out our society of drugs and we stop the drugs from coming to our country, because with the porous borders that we have in our country, drug dealers or the manufacturers of drugs are able to traffic drugs into our society, and then it is South Africans, especially poor South Africans now, who bear the brunt of drug dealing. So that is why for us, we are going to deal with the drug problem from the source, which is being very harsh when it comes to the drug dealers and stopping the trafficking of drugs from other countries to South Africa.
All right, thank you for outlining that. I was actually looking at your website earlier on, and you've described the party as a faith-based national political party, aimed to create and develop a decolonized, modern, healthy, happy, functional, democratic, fair and prosperous society that prides itself in integrity and inclusivity. I just want to look at the issue that has come to the fore, questions about the mushrooming of black political parties and the offering the issues that everyone seems to be echoing, and how you differentiate yourself from the rest, given the 30-year dispensation of democracy we find ourselves in, and just the competition amongst so many political parties and independent candidates. You know,
Liesl, when you talk about parties in our country, I would say there's two types of parties in our country. There's ATM and the rest, precisely because majority of these parties in our country, you'll remember that most of, for example, the ruling party, they were in exile, they were in prison, but hardly after they were reintegrated back to society, they were living in suburban areas. Where did they get the money? Because what people need to realize is that the private sector or capital has invested so much in leaders to an extent whereby some of these leaders, they were funded by the very same capital or business sector, private sector, that has continued to make South Africa for 30 years in an untransformed economy. Now, from a point of view of political parties, majority of political parties are funded by the very same beneficiaries of the of apartheid in terms of the economy, the very same beneficiaries of the structure of the economy now. So that is why when they speak out there in public, they do not touch the fundamentals of changing the structure of the economy. So what makes us different as the ATM is that we are a product of the frustrations of the people. ATM is not a party whereby people were expelled from a party or people were not voted for in a party, but it is people, ordinary South Africans. Hence, we always remind people, me personally, this is the first political party I'm part of. So I'm not in this space because I've been a political person who wanted power, etc. It is because of the frustrations of the people. And by the independence that comes with us being funded by our own membership fees, it makes us to be able to deal with the root causes of our problems instead of wanting now to move, not to confront with the root causes of our problems, which is how the economy is structured. Because if literally we are funded by a mining company or funded by a person that has got mining interests, you'll never talk about the mineral wealth of our country. If you are funded by the banks that manipulate the rand, you'll never talk about holding the banks accountable for the rand manipulation, and as well making sure that you transform the banking sector by having a state bank. So what makes us different as a party, we're independently funded by our citizens. We're not a representatives of the owners of our economy because we are funded by them.
So speaking about being a product of the frustrations of the people, I then also want to shine a spotlight on your performance to date and the work you've done. I was just looking that the party contesting its first election in 2019, you won 2 seats nationally, and then obviously one in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. Talk to us about the work you've done to hold government accountable, how that's indicative of what you stand for as a party as well, in terms of what you're going to deliver.
You know, from 2019 up until now, we've managed to deal with the bread and butter issues that affect the South Africans on a daily basis. We were the ones that called that Ekzuwa. There was a dam there, the water was not provided to the entire town. We actually compelled and forced the minister to actually make her way to Butterworth and actually deal with the problem. We've also dealt with the issues surrounding the lack of prioritization of citizens in the economy, because we're the first ones in Parliament to talk about the township economy and how it could be utilized to make sure that South Africans are beneficiaries of the economy where they live. And we've also dealt with the questions of the abuse of power, from the plane landing in Bisho Airport, from Pala to many other issues whereby the government has, the executive has abused its power. So what has made us to be able to continuously be able to champion what is right by the people of our country, it is precisely because we are a product of the frustrations. Whenever we take a platform in Parliament, we speak about what is in the best interest of the people. That is why even when there was this discussion about coalitions in our country, it did not start now with this moonshot pact of the DA. It started way earlier. And our contribution there, when parties were having a discussion in Parliament, we said we do not want an anti-so-and-so discussions amongst political parties, because it does nothing for our people. We want a pro-South Africa coming together of parties, whereby we put forward that these are the programs that need to be done in the best interest of the people, not an organization or coming together of parties that is saying we do not want party A or party B, because that does not automatically translate to dealing with the problems and helping South Africans. So that is what we've managed to do in Parliament. We've been very effective. Hence, you find that a lot of people would even assume that ATM is a main opposition party simply because of what we've managed to raise in Parliament.
How are you going to woo the youth? Perhaps those born after 1994, not loyal to the ruling party. Talk to us about how you're going to appeal to them, address their concerns as well.
You know, young people need to know that ATM has so much faith in young people, because when I was given the responsibility to lead ATM, I was only 30 years old, which clearly shows that the ATM believes in young people. When it comes to now, the young people are also of the view that this thing of forcing government or having legislation to say 50% of government spending must go towards SMMEs. We've got so many young people with business ideas, but they do not get any contracts, because the contracts that are there in government are contracts that are benefiting the big companies. Again, we're also in our manifesto saying that contracts below 10 million rands need to be set aside for SMMEs. Those are the companies predominantly owned by young people. Again, we're saying there needs to be a skills-based education system that is anchored on our mineral wealth, to an extent whereby, on a skills-based perspective, by the time a young person leaves matric, they must have a skill they can utilize to make a living on their own. And when it comes to the mineral wealth, our education system needs to be anchored on the mineral wealth, so that we train our young people to process all of these minerals, so that we are the ones that set the prices when we sell these minerals to the rest of the world. Not currently what is happening, whereby we sell our minerals as raw as they are, and then we buy them at a later stage, and we are price takers. So those are the things that are benefiting young people, by making sure that their education, because we also believe in free education, quality education, to make sure that young people are able to be skilled for the future, and not have an education system that is outdated, but primarily the question of the economy comes top to us. That is why we are saying, when it comes to the question of prioritizing SMMEs, it must not be just political talk, it must be backed up by legislation. That is why we are saying that under the ATM government, there will be clear legislation to say 50% of government spending must go towards SMMEs. Any government contract below 10 million must go towards SMMEs, in order to put forward the interests of young people.
There's a mindset conscious shift as well. Thank you for touching on that. I sure want to go back to the point of collaboration and working together, coalitions coming to the fore. I know that you were at the PAC's launch. I wanted to look at the viability of coalitions for South Africa, Inc. at large, and what your views are on the matter, working with other parties, the PAC, the EFF. Talk to us about that, and how there are complements and some of the issues as well. Just because the track record of coalitions on a local level hasn't been convincing, talk to us about how you're going to mitigate against some of the challenges that we've seen in recent years.
Our DNA as a party is that we're a pro-South Africa party. That is why we are able, when we had our celebration in May last year, 5th year anniversary, we invited all political parties, because we are of the view that we need to have a new culture of politics in our country, whereby we focus on the issues and refuse to be divided on the few areas whereby we've got different views on. Let us have a politics that is focusing. These are the issues. Major issues is unemployment, it is crime, it is poverty, it is inequality. And we move away from these politics whereby, because you are wearing a black t-shirt, I'm wearing a white, we're suddenly enemies. So that is why we're able to go to the different parties' events, and we also invite those parties to us. But critically, for coalitions to work, we're very clear as the ATM to say, we need to have coalitions that are based on a program of action. And a program of action is a program that will put the interests of the people first. It is a program that will deal with the problems. For example, we would want, as the ATM, to say, critically, if any party wants to go into a coalition with us, it must agree that the economy must be transformed. There must be a skills-based education system. And, we need to deal with the evergreen contracts that are milking the SOEs. We need to safeguard and protect our borders to ensure legal movement of people. And we stop the trafficking of humans, of drugs and vehicles. Now, once we've got a program of that nature, we're going to be able now to work together with any party, because we agree on what is to be done. Because what is making coalitions not to work at a local government level is that, number one, parties, they're just, they're program-wise, they do not agree. We've got a party that is saying it wants to build state capacity, being in a coalition with a party that believes in privatization. Therefore, the interests will be conflicted. And again, the point of departure for these parties is that we're going to give you a mayor, we're going to give you this particular position. Nothing about the people. We're of the view that The question of who gets to be president, who gets to be minister, must be the last question that must be answered. The first question that must be answered, what must be done to make sure that South Africa works? And then the second question would be, who is better skilled, better capable to address some of these problems? That is the way in which, in our view, coalition must be approached. Because
you're speaking of issues of cronyism and nepotism that we've obviously also seen playing out. So thank you for touching on that. There's so much to unpack. In the interest of time, I want to look beyond our borders, on the continent. Your stance on just what's happening globally as well. More than 70 countries are going to be going into elections. This obviously means that there's going to be a change of guard and there's going to be a shift geopolitically. What are your offerings? What are your stances in relation to that? Also South Africa's position in that geopolitical landscape?
For us, it's very clear to say, you know, in the continent, Africans in the continent must be the ones who are masters of their own destiny. Because for a very long time, you find that Africans are encouraged to flee their countries and they go to Europe or go to other countries, whereas they should be confronting what is wrong in their country. Remember that in Malawi, a few years ago, there was an election which was found to be a rigged election. It was Malawians who fought up until the Supreme Court actually overturned those elections. So we would want as a party that Africans, they need to confront whatever injustice is there in our country, whether it is in the form of Western countries that are plundering our mineral wealth like we see in Congo, or it is dictatorship that we see in other countries. But critically, Africans must shape their destiny by fighting for their countries so that ultimately the next generation of Africans are able to inherit a better continent. We're also of the view that, you know, what is happening in Palestine needs to be, you know, we need to add our voice on the genocide that is happening there, that we call for a ceasefire, and Israel must stop what it is doing, and more countries in the world, they need to take the side of the people that are being subjected to all of this genocide, which is the Palestinians. Again, on the question of what recently happened in Russia, we're also of the view that those terrorist activities there, we applaud Russia for the quick acting and dealing with those crimes there to ensure that, you know, terrorism and all forms of violence must never be tolerated, and governments must be enabled and encouraged to confront terrorism head on so that we don't have terrorists that are going to be given free space to reign in our world. We want a safer world, and for that to happen, there needs to be a no compromise approach on the question of dealing with terrorism and all forms of violence.
Vuyo, I wanted to, just in the interest of time, look at Human Rights Month that we're obviously observing in South Africa. Next month is Freedom Month, 30 years into our democracy. What are your thoughts on the progress of South Africa, its democracy, some of the strides that have been taken, but also the challenges? Where do you see your role?
You know, we need to applaud the ANC government for the transition from apartheid to democracy. But we need to realize that going forward, we need to talk about that there is no human rights where more than 60% of our population is living in poverty. Recently, there's a woman in Butterworth that committed suicide and also killed her children because of hunger. Therefore, that is why for us, there is no human rights when there is hunger. There's no human rights when there's high levels of unemployment. There's no human rights when South Africans are basically prisoners, whereby there's high levels of crime. So that is why we are saying as the ATM, let us confront the fundamentals of what is wrong in our country and not just make cosmetic changes, because for the past 30 years, the ANC has been making cosmetic changes to the economy instead of dealing with the fundamentals of the transformation of the economy, because the economy is centered amongst very few hands. Go to each and every industry, I can bet you. Talk about the banking industry, count how many banks that are there that are dominating that space. You won't reach 10. Go to financial services companies, go to telecommunications industry. It is the same thing throughout all of these industries. Now, ATM is here to break those monopolies, break those oligopolies, so that South Africans are also producers instead of having few families that are the ones that are dictating what we eat, what we use, and everything. So that is why you are saying as a party, let us deal with the fundamentals of the economy, structure the economy in a manner that ensures mass economic participation of the citizens, particularly by having the production or manufacturing-driven initiatives being owned by the citizens.